Good morning, Honors U.S. History students. The topic of this video is salutary neglect. Salutary neglect is the policy the British government pursued with the colonies from the time of the last documents we looked at, from the establishment of the Massachusetts colonies and the expansion of the colonies that would take place over the next 150 years and would continue to do so. But in that time, once the English colonies are established, the British government basically left them alone as long as they remained loyal to the king. So they, for example, didn't really enforce trade policies. They didn't tax the colonists very much. Goods were supposed to, who produced in the colonies, were supposed to go to British port to be taxed and then sold abroad. Colonists were skipping that step, and that went on for quite some time. So as the colonies developed, and they developed in some ways that would have a profound effect, like slavery would expand, not to a great extent until after the U.S. declares and establishes its independence. But it would expand. The transatlantic slave trade would be at its peak in the years leading up to the American Revolution. But as conflict arose, I'm going to flip to some notes that we have. You'll find these in your resources folder. But as conflict arose with France, as they began to butt over land in the Northeast, conflict was inevitable, and in 1754, war began between the French and the British. And both sides, who had been traditional enemies, poured a lot of resources into it. And by 1763, the British were successful. But one major problem the British had, the British government, is that they were now in debt. So this policy of salutary neglect, where they really allowed the colonists to do what they wanted, to settle where they wanted to trade as they saw fit with minimal taxes, would have to change. So this is what, in large part, leads to the relationship falling apart between the colonists and the British government. And it began with the proclamation of 1763, where the British, who left troops in Boston after the war ends. The British said it was because they needed to be protected, but the colonists certainly didn't view it that way, or a significant percentage of the colonists didn't see it that way. They viewed these British soldiers as occupiers. And on top of that, the British were beginning to regulate the colonies. Proclamation of 1763, for example, limited where settlers could move to. It banned all movement to the west of the Appalachians, where there was very fertile farming land. So that begins this path towards regulating the colonies to an extent that they had never been regulated before. The next slide, I'll just give one more example. And the next example happens right after that, and it's the first attempt at a tax, the Sugar Act in 1764. The belief was that British colonists in the New World were smuggling goods, and that they were profiting by avoiding British regulations. So the British government passed the Sugar Act and would continue to pass regulations and would continue to pass taxes that had never been levied on the colonists before.